Hello and welcome to the polling station with Johnny Ward, William Kedjanyi, and he's back. Paul Krishnamurty. How are you, Paul?
Hi, Johnny. Very well, mate. How are you?
I'm grand. I've had more sleep than you have, or certainly more regulated sleep. It turns out you've been punting Indian cricket.
This is winter for me. Australian, Indian, New Zealand, Pakistani cricket, all the hours. But
William Kedjanyi, what do you say to that?
I say it sounds like he's living the dream. I say he's going to be a very happy man when the day-nighters start, which I believe start at 9 a.m. our time and end at 4 p.m. So I'm pretty sure Paul will be living the dream for that week.
What's it like? What's it like actually punting at that hour of the morning? Because we all talk about discipline, Paul, and keeping on top of things. But if you're questioning your general sanity and it's only 7 a.m, maybe that's a bit different.
Well, I think it's a very good point. I mean, really, I have learned over the years, if I'm going to do this seriously, you've got to give yourself an hour before it starts. You've got to have 2 or 3 cups of coffee. I have woken up many times in the morning, got straight into a big bash game, and 6 overs later, I'm in trouble. So, generally speaking, give yourself an hour. But I'm used to it. If I've been doing cricket overnight for like 15 years, so it's just one of those occupational hazards. Winter.
Yeah, we haven't had him on, William, this year. I guess I'll put it over to you. I guess you want to ask him what his takeaways are from what was an incredible 2020, William.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if there were any sort of punting lessons that 2020 might have taught you. I mean, obviously it was a pretty remarkable year in many senses, and I wanted to know if there was anything you thought, that was interesting. I mean, that could be a Pandora's box in itself, but I've been keen to ask you that for a little while, so do take it away.
Well, it was, obviously, for me, 2020 was all about America, and pretty much the last few years have been. And I think the lessons you would draw from that were, firstly, never underestimate the power of fake news and internet nonsense driving the markets now, because that election was just crazy. The bigger political lesson, though, of course, was to me that it was the end of American conservatism. Trump has now completely owned the Republican Party, it seems. It's become a personality cult, and that's got all manner of implications for America, the world, and of course here as well. And in contrast to that, the story in Britain to me of 2020 was the Tories are untouchable. They're absolutely rock solid, and they can survive all manner of disasters, and 42% of the country will vote for them. So quite a contrasting lesson for the experience for Conservatives, I would say.
It's on that, Paul. I find myself absolutely demoralised that you can basically get away with so much now and maintain such support. And granted, okay, Britain's vaccine rollout has been the envy of people in Ireland, it's been the envy of people across the EU. That's all well and good. What about last year, though? What about the lies that Boris has told? How does Donald Trump, and we're going to have to talk about this, it's a morning consult Politico poll conducted at the conclusion of the Senate's week-long trial, the impeachment trial. A majority of Republican voters said they would support Trump in a hypothetical 2024 presidential primary election. What is wrong with the word? Seriously, I mean, vote Republican, grand, and I'd have issues with that. But how can you still vote for Donald Trump? Please explain this to me, and please explain why we as a species deserve to survive, given what we've done to the world.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to remember that the vast majority of Americans are against Trump, passionately. Never got a 50% approval rate. I think, the story of this, it's a long, old story, but the Republican Party was hacked by Russia. That's what happened. They've engaged in information warfare, and they have, they've pushed the far right and the far left in country after country, financially, amplifying them on social media, sometimes putting up candidates. And with the Republican Party, they've won. Trump tapped into something that was already there. with the Tea Party, which I always saw as a reaction to Obama, largely about race, but also culture. And that there's a big enough critical mass of people, however unrepresentative they are, Americans, to take over a political party. So unless there's something I thought might happen for years, and it just hasn't materialised, was there would be a reaction within the Republican Party. There would be a genuine grassroots resurgence of people who are actually conservatives, who've been in the party for 20 years and can remember what it was like before the madness. But it appears Trump has won. And if it isn't him, I don't think it will be him, it'll be someone making his image.
You should come in there, William, obviously, because just looking at the 2024 elected president, this is something I've heard or read many times in recent months, that basically the Republican Party is the Donald Trump party at this stage. Ivanka Trump is 25s, Donald Jr. Is 33s, and the shortest of the trio is Donald himself at 10s, which I think will appeal to some people after that poll.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could find a reason to back all three at their current prices. I'd be most interested in Donald Jr., who I have to say I'm a bit surprised is 33-1. I would have had him as likely shorter than Ivanka for a few reasons. Namely, I think that Ivanka is sort of suffering the double whammy effect of being associated with the Trump name whilst trying not to be, and trying to ride with, I would say, let's call them the Republican Party class for now, the sort of upper elite Republicans who mostly reside in sort of East Coast circles and wanted nothing to do, at least on the surface, of Donald Trump. Don Jr. has always embraced the Trumpism brand a bit more freely. He's also been mooted as a presidential contender for some time. I think, whether the Trump brand is an asset going forward, I think remains to be seen. This is all, I think, really close right to the election in historical terms. We don't really, I think, know whether him being off the sort of main media radar will hamper him or actually prove to be a blessing, perhaps, and solidify him in the Republican Party. But I think it's interesting to know that he has been the most active of the Trump family, Donald aside, since the election. So I can see there being a case made for him to sort of step into that sort of latent support for Trump, because if he runs in 2024, which he can do following his acquittal, I presume that he would hold on to a decent amount of that voting percentage. But if he doesn't, it's got to go somewhere. And I don't think there are too many Republicans left who Trump world can really get on board with. Donald Jr. would be one of them.
Paul?
So the way I see this playing out, I think that Trump will no doubt retain his cult, but it will become an irrelevant, distant cult without his social media mouthpiece, without the media falling for all his tricks as they did 4 years ago. And I don't think he'll have anything to say. Plus, I would say that Republicans have got many ways to stop him from running, right? Leaving aside the potential criminal trials that I think probably will happen, all they've got to do is pass a law saying, no, every candidate's got to release 5 years of tax returns. He'll run a mile.
All right.
So I think, I don't personally think he'll be on the ticket. Now, that's not going to stop Don Jr. I think there's every chance he'll run. I think he'll be such an awful candidate, though, and I just don't think you can be you can't directly imitate Trump. There is only one Trump. Right? He's picked up a very pale imitation. What you can do is pursue the same tack, the same audience, same lines, and that's why I go back to Tucker Carlson again and again. I know he hasn't said he'll run, but were Tucker Carlson to run, he would beat any politician. He's got the
28-1.
Yeah, and I mean he's already got a base in terms of his audience on Fox. That's probably enough to win a primary.
Can I just jump in?
Of course, William. Yeah.
Agree on the Tucker Carlson point if he runs. I think it's one of those great bets to nothing. It's one of those great bets to nothing, because if he actually just even confirms his intention, he'll get polled and he'll be like 10s within a week, or like 16s max. Absolutely. On the Trumpism brand, just quickly, I think he makes Paul a really good point about sort of payer limitations. I think what'll be interesting to see is which of the mainstream politicians take the same tack and are sort of generally accepted still by those remaining in Trump world, and sort of how large that base still is. Because we're thinking of something 4 years away. It's entirely possible it peters out into irrelevance, or it's entirely possible that it sort of his cult goes away, but that thinking still remains, which could make it very difficult for, let's say, your more traditional Republicans who are trying to return into the fold, which makes me interested in the likes of, say, Nikki Haley also, because she's there in the polling now. She's, I think, third possibly behind Mike Pence and Trump himself in Morning Consult. And I wouldn't necessarily have Pence as the likeliest runner. Or if he does, I think he may have a couple of issues, the same way that the Trump opponents had in 2016.
I just want to bring up something that I read this week in The Currency. It's an online journal that I write the odd bit for, generally horse or gambling related, but it's an interview with Peter Osborne, who worked with Boris Johnson. For 4 years, he was dazzled by his brilliance when Johnson was editor of The Spectator. Johnson, he said, had one of the quickest minds he'd ever encountered. They were magical years. I felt enormously privileged to work for him when he was editor of The Spectator. He was an uncannily brilliant editor who always had this unique ability, in my long experience in journalism, to see to the heart of the story. Osborne then goes on to talk about that Britain is almost a government of journalists at the moment in terms of the key people there. But to just extrapolate on that point, where is politics where at the moment where people like Boris can enjoy such, popularity, where Trump can enjoy such popularity, where there's so much fake news, as Paul has said, and what example is this setting for politicians, William, down the line, where they kind of know they can get away with an awful lot and still be popular as long as they kind of manage social media and manage the media well?
Yes, it's going to have a really profound effect. I would argue actually possibly already has. I don't think we're living in like the first era of politicians lying and winning elections, right? Like Lyndon Johnson did this and he was a Democrat. Nixon did this and was a Republican. It's happened lots. I think what's possibly different now is just the sort of speed and scale at which you can lie and not have to do it particularly effectively. With a lot of skill at all. And just sort of grind your opponent into submission or just overwhelm them with disinformation and fake news, which I think we're going to see a lot more of amongst electoral candidates who go for big positions in the future. I think it's sort of a given that down the line you'll have, let's say, a QAnon type or whatever, just to use a sort of stereotypical example, that would make it through to a primary or have a big national run, and some might win as well. What remains to be seen basically is how seriously do people really take the threat now. It's more of a known thing, or basically do people even care? So I think we are seeing a sort of big change. I think it's something political punters should be aware of. I think the best way to think about it when you factor it into your punting is to go case by case basis. Would you bet on Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, in a primary against a generic Democratic opponent in a state that leans red? She might be valued there, but I wouldn't suddenly start rushing to start backing up a president or whatever, or for a governorship, that sort of thing.
But like Paul, I suppose to put this a little bit simpler, does anyone have any ethics anymore in terms of who they're voting for? I mean, Joe Biden didn't have much against him, and it's not as if you're voting communist versus the National Socialists in the mid 30s here, two horrible options. You were Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and Donald Trump lied and lied and lied and lied and lied. he still lied, and basically people still want to vote for him in a free country. This is what I don't get my head around. And where is social media going here? Because the more access we have to free information, the more disinformation we're actually getting.
Well, to me, the thing that's driving that, there's a number of things driving that. First is that, another lesson that we must have learned by now is Twitter is a bubble, right? 90% of the country, maybe more, are disengaged in politics. They're not interested in politics. They're interested in it sometimes, right? But they're leading busy lives and they're being bombarded by advertising and all the micro information in the world from the minute they get up. There's only a few seconds in the day that they're going to be following politics. And now their social media timeline is already tailored to triggering their prejudices and confirming their opinions. And it's very easy to see how that has trained people to hate the other side, right? And that, to me, is what is new, I think. And that's how Trump could be so successful, because it's not that all Republicans like Trump. I've met hundreds, maybe thousands of Trump supporters, the Republicans who don't like Donald Trump, but they still voted Republican because they hate the other side, or they fear the other side.
And it's fascinating stuff, William. Just the opinion poll here as well, going back to Boris, which is going to be interesting for Keir Starmer, because he's fallen behind Boris as best prime minister for the first time since the early days of his leadership. And Keir Starmer seems to be in something of a no man's land at the moment, because all anyone really cares about is COVID and getting rid of it. And basically, Britain is kind of doing quite well on that score.
Yeah, the third or fourth lockdown is working, and the vaccination program, I think, perhaps even more importantly, is going at a tremendous pace. There is no reason for that to reverse, which makes things very difficult for Starmer. I think Starmer's sort of having a bit of a relevancy issue right now, in the sense that whilst he is a different lead to the one Labour has had before, he has, I think, what some would fairly say were the old issues, the sort of same issues that the likes of Miliband, maybe even going back further, Brown ran into, and also basically, when you lead with the opposition, you get a decent amount of media coverage in this country, but he doesn't have the sort of Tory support in the press, and he doesn't, I don't think, have that sort of information machine. And when I say that, I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial or anything. It's just difficult for any leader of the opposition to get purchase, and he needs that, especially given that he's unlikely to inflict a parliamentary defeat upon the government really ever. That sheer amount in sort of MPs that he has will determine that. Starmer needs a vision for Britain, and he needs to find one, I think, relatively quickly. I don't think we should panic, or I don't think I should say, should panic about the amount of time until the next election. What he probably should panic is about how the country sees and defines him. If he gets defined as just another politician too quickly, that could be a long-term thing that he really struggles to break, and then he really is in no man's land at the moment. I mean, I think he's running out of time to define that vision, and also probably to get the same amount of coverage that Johnson does whenever he goes out. Although I think, again, that's just leader of the opposition for him. I mean, he's doing better, I think, with that purchase than Jeremy Corbyn ever did. I think there's a certain authenticity, certainly in his best days, Corbyn had, that I don't think Starmer does right now.
The Britain Elects poll tracker has Boris positive 40.4%, negative 43.6%, but he's actually, the gap between positive and negative is actually in his favour there since the last poll, whereas Starmer was 36% positive, 29% negative, but Paul, that was from a position where he was far more positive than negative going back to April of last year. So whatever he's done, maybe he hasn't done anything, and that's the problem here. What does he do? Does he latch onto a green wave and go down that tide into the future and say that he's the person to save the planet? I don't know. What does he do?
Okay, so first of all, I don't think we should read very much into the short-term movements at the moment, or the last few months, even the next few months going ahead, because we're talking 2024 here. Now, first of all, totally agree with William. A lot of structural problems for Labour in Britain. That you have to start with low expectations and then see it as playing the long game. But I'm going to defend what Starmer's actually doing and point the way forward here, right? So, first of all, opposition leaders don't generally cut through. It was the same with a lot of Tories, Hay, IDS, Michael Howard, none of them cut through either. It's only Cameron and Blair who won from opposition. And they both pursued a very similar strategy. And I think Starmer is doing that. And that is simply, you understand about both the toxicity of your own party and the disengaged electorate. So for the first year, 2 years, you know the country's not really interested in what the opposition's policies are. You just focus on the brand. Just stay out of fights, clean the brand up, don't threaten anybody. Let the electorate look at you and say, that person doesn't scare me. My family and my money are safe with him. Now I hear what he's got to say. Right?
Play the long game.
Yeah, Corbyn never did that. Right? Never did that paid one stuff. Right? I'd say Billy never did that paid one stuff either. And then you time your attacks. You time your attacks, things that work for you. Now take Angela Rayner today calling for £10 minimum wage for all carers. That's a brilliant dividing line for Labour. That's the way to do it. You don't have to have loads and loads of detailed policies. Just hit them with targeted things. Now, thinking ahead and the brand, the next big issue in British politics is Scottish independence. It will dominate 2022 and beyond. And that is a dream dividing line, you would think, for both the Tories and for the SNP. Now, the only position Labour can take in this, and they've got to take it, which Miliband didn't do last time, is to stake themselves out as the party of the union, bringing people together, that we're stronger together as nations, but we're nothing like the Tories, right? Don't go and share a stage with Boris or something like that. And that's where him embracing the flag is a positive thing. Because when that debate happens, Labour,
it's not stupid patriotism. It's actually keeping the union together.
That's right, keeping the union together, exactly. And when that debate happens, when that whole row, culture war happens, for once, Labour will be the party in the middle. The nationalists will be on one extreme and the English nationalists on the other. And Starmer can build this narrative going to the next election that we're sick of all the division, we're sick of all the referendums. We're the party that will bring the country back together, economically, socially, nationally. And I think that could work.
I think, William, I can see Keir Starmer actually attributing Labour's victory in 2024, whenever the next election is, to Paul Krishnamurty, having watched the polling station of a February afternoon and landed on the bingo. This man is saying something here, and it actually makes a lot of practical sense.
Yeah, it does. It does, as it's everything Paul has been saying today. Hopefully we can keep him before the leader of the opposition snaps him up. But no, I think
probably can't quite match his wages if Labour. But
No, I'll take a pay cut. If Keir wants me, I will take a pay cut. I will do my bit for the country. You heard it.
But just going on from that, because it's been a running theme, I think in 5 of the last 6 polling stations, we've discussed the flag bit. It's a tricky line to tread, but Paul's strategy makes sense. The one thing I would say is just that he might be counting upon people getting sick of the culture wars, which to be fair, is a thing that is entirely possible to happen. I just think for that to be the case, other things might need to go wrong for the government. And again, I'm saying this very hypothetically because it is the beginning of 2021. There's just so much ground to be covered and so many things that we don't know will be issues, which will come up, right? Like at the end of the last general election, I don't think anybody imagined, say, you wouldn't be able to go racing for nearly a year on end, or that, we'd all be getting used to doing everything via Zoom. One thing I would say Labour does need to think about is possibly taking a sort of set position regarding their stance on Queen and country. You don't need to attach yourself to the royal family. I don't think that's a thing you need to do anymore unless you really want to. But attaching yourself to Britain as a concept is something I think is going to become increasingly tricky over the next 2 years or so, if it isn't. There's nothing wrong, I don't think, with Starmer attempting to move Labour or attempting to show Labour as a party that loves Britain. But the only issue is if he gets into that battle, he's got to avoid trying to go one up with the Tories on it, because it's not something I think that he'll win in this information environment, or just generally with a party that is just so obsessed about making the most tedious battles into sort of months-long wars that dominate their thinking, as you see with the recent sort of free speech at university plans, or regarding the statues debate, or regarding basically the British history debate, you know, where suddenly it seems to be government business now to defend Britain from sort of the facts of its past. When actually, went and you asked your man or woman in the street, unless you brought up the conversation, it wouldn't really be something that would trouble them too much. Certainly that's my view and from where I'm standing. But no, I definitely agree. I think Paul makes a good point. Only issue is Starmer probably needs to protect his brand before he can get there. I think the really tricky issue might just be, can he get there and people still think, you know, he's a prime minister or whatever. Labour's "Are you ready for power" rating is better than it was when Starmer took over, but it's beginning to get a drop now, and that could put it all into irrelevance if people suddenly look at the Labour Party and go, not for me, seeing him as a government.
I hope you've enjoyed the two intellectual heavyweights today of William and Paul. But before we finish up with Paul, you've been very strong on this the last time you were on. If there's a Scottish referendum on independence before the end of 2025, how would Scotland vote? Yes is even money outsider, and no to independence will be 8 to 11. This flies completely in the wall of all polls I've seen for the last while. It's obvious that Scotland will vote for independence. Is it not? Even money.
I think that's a great bet. I'd price it about 47.
What can go wrong?
Well, what can go wrong is the SNP can go wrong, I guess. I mean, again, getting back to what we were just saying about Starmer, that there is maybe this narrow path in the future where they take over again as the main unionist party in Scotland, and the SNP get a bit discredited. Sturgeon stands down, isn't replaced by anyone nearly as impressive, and that there is something like that. But I don't really see it. I don't see the way that England are moving and the way that Scotland are moving socially and politically. Just seems inevitable.
What are you looking forward to politically in 2021 yourself?
Well, you know, we've got betting-wise, you know, a lot of the main events are quite one-sided, so it's all going to be side market orientated. So really, I'm just going to be enjoying the whole spectacle of Trump being charged and his movement going to prison after these hundreds and hundreds of court cases. That I'm going to enjoy that, and then watching the Republican Party have a fight and building positions for the years ahead on that, I guess.
It sounds like he's going to look forward to that with absolute glee, William Kedjanyi.
He may not be the only one. He may be far from the only person crossing his fingers and hoping for that to happen.
Last word to you, William.
This year, I'm very much looking forward to the local elections. We'll be covering that lots on the polling station. Absolutely cannot wait. A whole heap of mayoral contests, also Welsh Assembly contests. Indeed, there are elections too in Scotland. That all ties in across May, so I just can't wait for that. Also, we're going to see a picture build in France over their next presidential election, and then of course the German federal election. So looking forward to lots of Europe-wide stuff. In America, I'm just going to watch the Trump question. I want to see how it develops over the months ahead. I want to see if Morning Consult still gives him like 60% in 6 months' time. Because just quickly, one or two last points. If Trump maintains that sort of headline intention polling, it forces the Republicans into a real crossroads, which I think they were going to have to confront anyway. namely the fact that you can't really disassociate with Trump without losing some of their voter base, possibly more than half of it. But the Trump brand in general society in America, which has never, as Paul said earlier, been that popular, is down. Like, people are well down on it. Your average middle of the road voter, who we're told decides elections, is well down on Trump and all things sort of Trump in name and nature. So the Republicans have to decide their crossroads, and they have to do that, I think, before the midterms. Also, another thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, if there is, or when there is, a Scottish independence referendum, it's probably likely that for it to happen, Boris Johnson won't be Prime Minister. I just can't get that out of my head. I think somebody told me, and I really want to credit them with it, but I just can't get that out of my head. I really can't.
Yeah, I think that's, you do have to think what might happen in the years to come when this vote actually may take place, what the landscape will be then. But all my ex-girlfriends will attest to the fact that I'm very bad at ending things. I've been quite bad at ending this show today. So we're well into the 30 minutes. But if you're still listening and you're still watching, it's been so much fun. I have a treat for you. I'm going to ask the lads for a political book that they would advise for somebody to read in all these hours of lockdown. And as much as we moan about lockdown, William Kedjanyi, it does give you opportunities to do things. And it gave me the opportunity to read Blood Oil, the book about Mohammed bin Salman, which is absolutely fascinating. And I've just been stuck into for the last few days and nearly finished. That's written by Bradley Hope. Fascinating book. Over to you, William, and then we'll get Paul's nod.
I'm going to cheat on this. So number one is a book I'm already reading. It's
he actually has the book. Look at this, Paul. He has the book beside. Oh, here we go. Unbelievable.
So this is one of two. Now Ben Keith, actually, lovely starman Ben Keith, gave me this, and I've been getting more into it when I can find the time, because I'm also currently reading the Obama memoir. But let me give you a real loosener, a real bit of fire into this. The book I'm most waiting to read, the book I'm most eagerly anticipating, isn't even going to be published this year. It's not going to be published this year. Phoenix Andrews, who is an absolutely sensational broadcaster and writer, has got to deal with Atlantic. They're an independent British publisher of literary fiction and non-fiction, and she's going to be publishing I Heart Politics, Why Fandom Explains What's Really Going On next year. Now, I know that's a really long one, a really long wait, but I tell you, I urge every single person watching this, when that becomes available on pre-sale, get a copy. There won't be a better guide, Paul aside, to why politics is the way that it is at this current point when it comes out.
He does love to flatter you, Paul.
Right, so on the book front, I'm going to be very predictable, I'm afraid, because it's the most important issue of our time, and I'm obsessed with it, but people need to know this stuff. So Putin's People by Catherine Belton, which is like the ultimate story of who they are, how they got there, how Russia works, and the implication, it leads you into the massive implications for our politics. And on the same subject matter, I've been very one-dimensional here. The Road to Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, which has been out for about 4 or 5 years and is just essential reading, really, to the threat that faces us.
Lads, that was absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward actually to reading at least a couple of the books you mentioned there. And I'm not sure I'll say I'm looking forward to it, but I do have visions of, I'm not a great sleeper, waking up around about 4 or 5 in the morning and thinking, what's Paul Krishnamurty doing now? He's probably betting on the Indian Premier League.
Pakistan Super League, Saturday. That's the big one.
What, have you answered the back?
I think that, yeah, I'd say back Hyder Ali, top tournament batsman, 25-1. I think Moulton Sultan's a good value at 5-1 for the title. They're the value out of 6 teams.
William, we need to get him back. We
absolutely do. If you'll do us a pleasure again.
Anytime. I love it. I love coming on this. Great show.
And that's why he will ultimately be taken by Keir Starmer, and the Labour Party is sort of a Cummins role to lead Britain to glory and to keep the union together. Thank you very much. That was the polling station. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, William. Shall be back next week.